We are off and running. Hello. We welcome you to the Paul Bear Bryant Awards Heart of the Game series. I'm Andrew Monaco. I'm the voice of the Aggies. And joining me is my lovely co-host. You might know her from her nationally syndicated radio show and podcast, The Boss and the Gloss. Hello, Carla Dawson.
Hello, my friend Andrew. Great to see everybody.
We are honored and thrilled to have Joe Namath, Gene Stallings, Bill Battle, Leroy Jordan, Jackie Sherrill, Walter Lewis, and Dr. Galen McCullough. That is an impressive list. All of these gentlemen are legends in their own right, and they have one thing in common. They all played for Coach Bryant. Now, here to kick off the event is Vicki Holland. She's the CEO of Occidental Petroleum, former chair of the Paul Bear Bryant Awards, and generous sponsor of today's event. Welcome, Vicki.
I just wanted to say thank you so much, Andrew and Carla, and thanks to all of you for joining us here today. The Bryant Awards are incredibly special to me because my mother, my brother, and Coach Bryant made me who I am today. Keeping Coach Bryant's legacy alive is so important as he has impacted not only players, but coaches, families, and CEOs both on and off the field. Today, we'll hear from 7 outstanding players. I hope you'll listen to their words, reminisce about Coach Bryant, and think about how you can carry Coach Bryant's legacy forward in today's modern world because the lessons he taught are timeless. Now it is my great honor and privilege to introduce Dr. Galen McCullough, a fellow Alabama alum, Bear Bryant leadership team member, academic All-American on Coach Bryant's 1964 championship team, and the gentleman who coordinated all these amazing legends to join us here today. Dr. Galen, welcome.
Vicki, thank you very much. And I want to thank everybody that's affiliated with the Paul W. Bryant College Football Coach of the Year Award for giving me this opportunity to assemble what I think is an all-star lineup of former teammates and coaches. Our mission today is to remember Coach Bryant, the coach and the man, after whom the American Heart Association's College Football Coach of the Year is named. He was a man, as you will come to see, that had a positive impact not only on our lives, but on the lives of countless thousands of whom we have shared his teachings and examples. What I chose to call today's Bryant Huddle is comprised of Coach Gene Stallings, Bill Battle, Leroy Jordan, Joe Namath, Jackie Sherrill, Walter Lewis, and myself. Each participant is being asked to share a life lesson that he learned from Coach Bryant, whether that be a statement, a moment, or an event that will let the world know why Coach Bryant was so successful in coaching young men to deliver championship performances, both in sports and in the all-important game of life. I believe we'd be remiss at the beginning of this event if we didn't recognize the passing of a man who could have been a key figure in this event. The empty chair belongs to this year's Bryant Awards Lifetime Achievement winner, Coach Howard Schnellenberger. Howard played for Coach Bryant at the University of Kentucky and later came to Alabama, where he and Gene Stallings coached together, while most of us played. After leaving Alabama, Howard went on to an impressive coaching career of his own, winning a national championship at the University of Miami. This evening, I'm going to ask each participant to share their Bryant teaching moment in the order of their relationships with Coach Bryant, beginning with the longest time frame to the shortest. In that manner, I'm going to ask Coach Gene Stallings to kick off the stories. Unfortunately, we're not able to get Gene on video, but I have him here on the speakerphone. So Gene, at this point in time, I'll turn the microphone over to you. And let me just remind people that you were a tight end on Coach Bryant's 1957 Texas A&M Southwest Conference Championship team. You were a defensive coach on Coach Bryant's 1961 and 64 national championship teams, was a head coach of the Texas Aggies, defensive coordinator on several Dallas Cowboys Super Bowl teams, coached at the University of Alabama to the 1992 national championship team. So, Gene, I turn the microphone over to you now for your comments.
First of all, Galen, I appreciate you putting us all together. I'm sorry that my TV don't work. Ruth Ann has been working on it for a long time, just couldn't get it to do anything. But let me say a few words about Coach Bryant. First of all, those of us that have played for him and coached for him, our X's and O's were no better than anybody else's X's and O's. But our players didn't think so. They thought that because Coach Bryant was on our sideline, that was worth 12 or 14 points just because we had him on our sideline. And those of us that played for him and coached for him, we felt the same way. Just having him on our team meant a lot to our football team. I think it was the 61 team where Leroy Jordan was playing defense, that the entire year we just gave up 21 and 23 points the entire year. Teams now make that many points in a quarter or a half. But Coach Bryant really put the emphasis back in those days on playing defense, and nobody did it better. Some of the things that Coach Bryant taught me, first of all, he taught me just never give up and be honest with your dealing with the press. The press will try to get you to say things that you don't want to say, but he would teach us that you do not have to answer every question that the press asks you. And time and time again, the press would ask me a question that I didn't want to answer. I would ask them, have y'all ever been to Tuscaloosa in the fall of the year? Prettiest place in the world. They said, well, we understand that, but that's not what we want to talk about. And I would say, but that's what I want to talk about. And Coach Bryant told me that just because they ask you a question, you don't have to answer it. Also, when I think of Coach Bryant, I think of the team that we played him when I was at Texas A&M, playing him in the Cotton Bowl. Very few people will say, I've got the best team, but you beat us. And yet that's what Coach Bryant did. He had a meeting with the press, and he said, now, in my opinion, Alabama was the best football team. Texas A&M won the game. So he was extremely honest with the media. Everything that he did it in a first-class way. And what a joy it was to play for him and coach for him. Let me say this about coaching. He did not think that you had to have all the knowledge in the world to be on his staff. You had to be honest. You had to be loyal to him, and you had to have some kind of knowledge about what you were trying to do. As an example, when I left Alabama and went to Texas A&M, my job at Alabama, I was assistant head coach in charge of the defense. In my own opinion, it was going to be hard to replace me because who had the experience that I had? He hired Pat Dye. Pat Dye had not ever coached a down, but he knew that Pat Dye was a winner. He was a good football player. He competed on every place that he had been, and he felt Pat would fit in and do an outstanding job at Alabama, which he did also at Auburn. But that was Coach Bryant's style. He wanted somebody that was knowledgeable about the game, loved him, and it was just a joy to be associated with him for the years that I was.
Well, Beeves, thank you so much for that. And I don't know that anybody knew him any better because you played for him and you coached for him during those formative years and that transition from A&M to Alabama. And many people may not know that you were one of the original Junction Boys. A lot of people hear about the Junction Boys when Coach Bryant went to A&M, but you were one of those few that survived that tough test. And I'm sure you probably believe that it made you a better man because you were there. And you've certainly been a tremendous influence on my life, and I think on the lives of every one of us.
Let me tell you one thing that was cute about Junction. Now, wasn't much cute about Junction. We were on the field when the sun went up, was on the field when the sun went down, at meetings, and it was a tough time. But this was a Saturday night. We couldn't keep our eyes open, and Coach Bryant walked in the meeting room, and he said, tomorrow is Sunday. How many of you guys would like to go to church? And we all put our hands up. He sent the manager around, Troy Sumner, and he said, Troy, write everybody's name down that wants to go to church. I said, Troy, get me. I go to church on Sundays. He said, Babes, I'll get you. And he looked at that list and he handed it to Coach Bryant. Coach Bryant said, isn't this nice? Everybody want to go to church? We're going to go right after we practice. So anybody would have voted to do it. But that's just the way Coach Bryant handles it.
He could throw you a curveball when you were least expecting it. Well, thank you for all that. And the second member that I want to share the story is Bill Battle. Bill was a tight end on Coach Bryant's 1961 national championship team, is an inductee of the Alabama Sports Hall of Fame, was a former head coach, I believe, for about 7 years at the University of Tennessee. Bill had been a tremendously successful businessman and benefactor to the University of Alabama. He recently served as University of Alabama's Director of Athletics and currently serves as a special advisor to the president of the university. So, Bill, would you share a couple of stories with us, please?
I'd be glad to, Galen, and honored to be on this call. I was fortunate to get to know Coach Bryant at 3 different levels. As a player playing for him on Leroy and I on his first teams and his first national championship team, and as a coach against him. I was 11 years at Tennessee, 4 as an assistant and 7 as a head coach. And that wasn't all that much fun coaching against him. Sometimes it wasn't all that much fun as a player, but it was, looking back at it, we knew we were part of something special and we were glad to be there. And as Coach Stalin said, we did definitely believe in him and his philosophy and his diligence and preparation. But one day in 1981, I was running the board meeting and I also had to go get Coach Bryant over to Holiday Inn. 81 was the year that if he won 9 games, he became the all-time winningest college football coach. And so we were walking up the stairs and Coach Bryant said, "I'm going to change agents. Those guys in New York aren't doing anything for me." And I was shocked that he would even had an agent, and it was IMG, the best sports marketing company in the world, and still is today. But anyway, I couldn't hardly think about running the board meeting. I was thinking we had started this little company, a little marketing company that got into licensing and sponsorship and advertising. And so after the meeting, I walked down stairs with Coach Bryant, take him back to the Holiday Inn. And I said, "Coach, I don't know anything about being an agent, but I know about you and I'll make sure that we do it. I think we got a little company that can help you and give you a lot of attention. And I think during this time we can help you." And in his old low gravelly voice, he said, "I ain't got nothing to sell. Best in the business, been trying to sell me for years. All I want is somebody to take my request for speaking engagements and tell them I can't come." And I said, "Coach, we can handle that." So we ended up signing an exclusive licensing agreement to represent all of Coach Bryant's commercial interest other than his radio and TV shows. So during that time, the relationship with Coach Bryant as a player, you didn't talk to him very much unless you were in trouble or you were talking football as a coach against him. You couldn't talk very much. We talked socially at SEC meetings, but as a businessman and being able to travel with him, we were able to talk about everything: players, coaches, X's and O's, politics, anything that came up. And that was a whole different level that really impacted me at an even greater perspective than already the great impact he made on me as a player and as a coach against him. The thing that I remember the most was when being able to see behind the scenes how much Coach Bryant, how much time he spent, even during the season, helping people. Many of his former players and many of them that he helped didn't even know he helped them. And that to me is the mark of a great man. He didn't want to take credit for any of that. I was shocked at the amount of time, even during the season, that he would spend either on the phone talking to people who had cancer or some other disease or were down and out for various reasons. And again, he had delegated a lot at that time, even though he still had control of the team. But it was very impactful to me to see how he handled his benevolence to other people. And he was great for me personally in business because he was our first client, and we got started promoting him and licensing deals. And many of you may remember that South Central Bell commercial. That South Central Bell did a great job of sending in the New York production team, and they'd take 4 hours to tape a 30-second or a minute commercial. And so I was standing outside the door, and this particular commercial was promoting long distance services because Ma Bell was about to break up into the Baby Bells, and this was South Central Bell that conducted this commercial. And so it ended, the commercial ended was, have you called your mama today? I sure, and that's how it ended. It started with, when my players come back, I tell them to call your mamas and papas and stay in touch. And so the end of the thing said, have you called your mama today? So with it about ended, it's almost noon. And I heard him stand outside his door, and he said, have you called your mama today? I sure wish I could call mine. And so they said, wow, that's great. And so they did that for another 30 minutes or an hour. And that was the commercial they used. And they said they got more comments on that commercial than any that they had ever done. So he was good at whatever he did. He was great as a coach, but he was great as a businessman too. But most of all, he was a great human being and impacted all of our lives.
Well, thank you so much for that. And you do have a unique perspective, because I don't know that very many of us, if any of the others of us, had a business relationship with him. And as you said, he could be a different person wherever he was. He could fit into any environment and make everybody feel comfortable in that environment. So now let's move on now to the next member of our huddle, Leroy Jordan. Leroy Jordan's a name that's synonymous with University of Alabama football back in the day when we were there. And Leroy was an All-American center linebacker on Coach Bryant's 1961 national championship team, along with Bill Battle. He was also my away game roommate during the 1962 season, and I got a chance to know Leroy and many members of his family as a result of that during the season. He went on to become an All-Pro linebacker with the Dallas Cowboys. Is a Super Bowl champion, an inductee in the College Football and the State of Alabama Sports Hall of Fame, and is a successful Dallas businessman. So, Leroy, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to hearing your story.
Well, Galen, I'm just going to talk about how Coach Bryant impacted my life. And he was up there in the leadership with my parents. He was one of the leaders in my life. So I'm so grateful for that. And he reminded us every day that we had to practice at 100% if we were going to play at 100% in the game. So he really reminded us that quite often. He helped me play 14 years with the Cowboys, and so we were in Super Bowl V, and we lost, and we went back next year and won Super Bowl VI, and we were in the playoffs 11 out of the 14 years that I was there. Coach Bryant taught me everything I knew about football and competing and preparing myself for the daily grind that it was going to be out there. And so I'm just glad to be here with all you guys and recognizing him for the great individual he was and the great coach that he was. best coach ever, ever, ever. And that's all I got to say.
Well, you won't have any disagreement from anybody on this call about him being the best coach ever. And, I know that some people may not realize that you and Gene Stallings were there with the Cowboys at the same time. He was a defensive coach, and I think you were a player coach as well. So y'all took a lot of the same things to you, or with you, I'm sorry, took those things with you to the Cowboys. And I'm sure that your and Coach Bryant and your and Gene Stallings' relationship with Coach Bryant probably had a lot to do with the Cowboys' success down through the years. And so I think that you both deserve a lot of credit for that. And once again, Leroy, I want to thank you so much for joining us on this. As I said, you're a true icon. You were a hero to so many of us, and we looked up to you. And you were the standard by which Coach Bryant held the rest of us to during those years. And I really appreciate you joining with us today.
Glad to be here.
Next, we've got Joe Namath, who's a household name throughout America and much of the world. Proud to say that Joe and I are classmates, that we went there together and we finished eligibility together. He was an All-American quarterback on Coach Bryant's 1964 National Championship team. He went on to become an All-Pro quarterback and a Super Bowl champion with the New York Jets, that famous Super Bowl where he predicted victory and delivered on victory. And it's still today considered to be one of the most bold statements of an athlete ever. But Joe delivered, as he often did. Joe's an inductee in the National Football Foundation Hall of Fame and in the State of Alabama Hall of Fame. He has had a career as an actor on stage and screen, and also a very successful television personality. So, Joe, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to hearing your comments.
Well, thank you for having me, Galen, and it just is wonderful to see all of you guys and talking with you about someone that we love. We learned to love the man. You see, when I came down to the University of Alabama, I was not familiar with Coach Bryant, other than he had coached at Kentucky, and two of our favorite quarterbacks back home was a guy named George Blanda and a guy named Vito Bay Pirelli. Mm-hmm. So knowing that Coach Bryant knew something about Western Pennsylvania guys, that was comforting. I knew a lot was expected, but I didn't know what to expect for being in that part of the country. Coach Bryant, the first thing, man, that I saw from him was respect he had for other people. The respect he had for other people around him, anyone that came up to him. He was a gentleman. He had the respect for other people. He treated them the way that he knew people should be treated. Football-wise, with me, I can remember in my practicing with the team, it was a time that I fouled up. I was on the ground, and Coach Bryant was saying some things to me as I was getting up, and he wanted some kind of response, and I was just shaking my head, yeah. And boy, next thing I knew, he had me straightened up. And he looked me in the eye and he said, boy, when I talk to you, you look me in the eye and say, sir. And I said, yes, sir. And that was one of the first things that I made a real connection, I thought, with them. And that's the thing I've done throughout life, too, with everybody. I have respect for them, and I look them in the eye when we're talking about some things. I know that's important. We're getting ready to play in 62, Galen. You know, you and I and Leroy, Billy had finished already, but we're getting ready to play Georgia opening game. And we took the walk outside the hotel. Coach Bryant used to take the quarterbacks out after the pregame meal. He said, Joe, you got the game plan? I said, yes, I think so. He said, you what? You think so? Well, son, it's time to know the hay's in the barn, boy. I didn't know anything about hay in the barn, but I know he got my attention there. And from that, I'm supposed to know, sent so many messages. One, he was counting on us. He was counting on us to be ready. They prepared us. My teammates, you and I, Galen, Leroy, I know you expected the best out of your teammates, guy to guy.
Yeah.
And right then, when Coach Bryant said that, man, I never was, I think so again, when it came to the team, when it came to being ready to play or perform. One time my father was in the hospital and I wasn't 100% ready for the short yardage situation. I got to Baltimore late and my lady luck was on our side. We won the game, but that was the one time in pro ball. And after that walk outside of the hotel in Birmingham, I was prepared. I made sure I learned to prepare for what I needed to do because I owed it to the team. I owed it to them for them to have confidence in me and for me to have confidence in them. I knew you were ready, Galen. Leroy showed us how to get ready. I knew you guys were ready, and I needed to learn that. So that was important. He instilled that in me. And the one thing to this day that I've told my children and teammates, friends around me, was the very first meeting we had as freshmen at Alabama. Coach Bryant told us, we're going to win some games, we're going to lose some, and we're going to remember the ones we lost. They're going to stick in y'all's craw the very rest of your lives. And boy, he was right about that.
Yeah.
He was right about that. God almighty, it's so much comes back as we're talking about Coach Bryant. It's easy to go on. But in that meeting when we were freshmen, Galen, he told us, if you dare think you can't do it, you won't. Be confident, earn that confidence, go out and work for it, get yourself ready to know you can, and we're going to do it. So I've told my children, like I say, grandchildren, now, honey, if you think you can't, you're not going to do it. Why can't you do it? You can do it. Get ready for it, and you can do it. Man, I'm looking forward to hearing to Walter and Jackie, and I've loved listening to Leroy and Billy, man, and Galen. Yeah. This is wonderful to be together again with you guys. Thank you.
Well, Joe, it's interesting that you brought that up about expectations. And this is hard for a lot of people to believe when I tell them about our time at Alabama. We never expected not to win the game. We always expected to win the game. As long as there was one more snap, we expected to win the game. We didn't always win it, but, we won them all but 4. The time that we were there, we only lost 4 games, and none of those by any more. We lost 1 by 1, 1 by 2, 1 by 4, and 1 by 5. So we had a good run, and he knew how to get those expectations from us. And I want to say something about you too while we're here. How much confidence he had in you, because our senior year, toward the end of the Auburn game, word came from the bench that you only lacked 20 some odd yards, breaking the all-time passing record. And coach said it was okay for you to put the ball in the air. And I'll never forget, you looked at that person who came into the huddle and told us that. And he said, "Are you crazy?" He said, "We put the ball in the air, get it intercepted and get beat. No way." And you called a series of running plays and ran the clock out. But that's how much confidence he had in you at that point, that he would give you the ability to throw the ball even if the game was on the line like that. So I want you to know it was a pleasure and honor to play with you. And I thank you for being on this this Zoom meeting with us, Joe. And we'll have another round, I hope, here in just a little while to hear some more stories from you. Our next huddle panelist is Jackie Sherrill. Jackie was also a teammate of Joe's and mine, although he was 1 year younger. And so he played on both the 1964 and the 1965 championship teams. Jackie coached at Alabama with Coach Bryant as a graduate assistant for a year, and then his college career as head coach took off, and he became head coach at Washington State University, the University of Pittsburgh, Texas A&M, and Mississippi State University. In 1961, Jackie received the Walter Camp National Coach of the Year Award. He's an inductee of the state of Mississippi's Sports Hall of Fame. And Jackie, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to hearing some of your comments.
Well, thank you, Galen. And again, Joe, it's an honor to be on with you and Bill and Leroy. You know, Leroy took care of me as a freshman, and I appreciate that very much. But, you know, everybody always asks what was Coach Bryant? Coach Bryant, my description was always he was a man's man. He was very large in stature. He was 6'4" plus. He had a command of his voice. He also had a great presence, like Joe said. When he walked in, he had the command of the room. But he also had great compassion. And the compassion, especially with handicapped kids. You know, we would see him time after time spend an awful lot of time with a handicapped kid. But he also knew his players. You know, everybody did not think Coach Bryant was a player's coach, but he was a player's coach. He knew his players. He knew the players' parents. He also knew what motivated the players. And everyone on this call at different times, we probably did not do things correctly, but we got motivated very quickly by Coach Bryant. And, you know, you look at as a player, the lessons, like Galen and all of us learned one thing. We never gave up. And he made sure of that you understood if you played for him, you wasn't going to give up. Same thing about finishing, you know, that we did the things as a coach. And this is something that Coach Bryant taught. As a coach, he made us do things we did not want to do. But he also, all of us, he helped us accomplish things we never thought we could ever accomplish. And that is, as a player, later in life, and all of us have been touched later in life by Coach Bryant. I called him twice later, asked him a couple of things, and he always said the same thing. Jackie, I can't tell you what to do, but then he would tell me a story of what he did and what he was saying to me, this is what you do. And every time I talked to him, he always had the right answer. The things that I got from him as a coach, and later I coached with Coach his last game. I coached with him in the East-West game. And so we go to a luncheon, and I'm trying to be funny. And I said, you know, I'm the highest paid gopher in the country. So he speaks after me. He gets up and he says, Jackie, I hate to disappoint you, but my grandson's higher paid than you are, young man. So, but he always had an answer for anything. And also the lessons he gave me that I used is prepared. And we were more prepared than our team, the teams that we played. He practiced as hard. And we always remember him saying, you practice harder than you, practice is going to be harder than you play the game. And it was. We practiced a lot harder than a lot of games that we had to play in. But the most important thing Coach Bryant did to all of us, he put us in the right position to succeed. And then he got out of the way and let us perform. I don't remember Coach Bryant ever coming unglued on the sideline. I don't remember, and you look at the years, but on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, he may come a little unglued, correcting what we did. And nothing but a winner, and he was. And he taught us. And all of us in our life, whatever we did, it was very different. But the things that always stuck and, you know, helped me in my career as a coach, you were not your player's friend. You were the coach. And we take that into our parents. As a parent, we're not our kids' friend. But Coach Bryant, later in life, every one of us, he was not only our mentor as a coach, as a young people, but later in life, he made sure that he stayed in touch, and he helped all of us become better at our profession than we ever thought we could be.
Jackie, you said something that I want to pick up on, because I've often told people it's amazing how he always had exactly the right thing to say, the right comeback, the right thing to say at halftime or after the game. And so an incident occurred several years after I finished playing there. He used to come to Birmingham and speak to the Touchdown Club, and he didn't want money. He wanted a $20 gold piece. He'd figured out you didn't have to pay income taxes on those gold pieces, if you got a check, you did. And so that night, the guy that was supposed to get the gold piece didn't have it. And I told him, I said, Coach, I'll get that gold piece to you. I promise you in the next few days. He said, well, we're going to be up here in Birmingham, Holiday Inn in Bessemer. We'll be playing Baylor on Saturday. So I'll be there Friday night. Why don't you drop it by Friday night? So I had the gold piece, and I went by there and I knocked on the door, and he came to the door, and I said, Coach, here's your gold piece. I know you're getting ready for the game. He said, no, come on in. I need to take a break. So I walked in, and he had taken the desk in the suite and pulled it to the center of the room, and with a chair there. And he had 3 legal pads lined up on that desk. And I walked by and looked at him, and we went over and sat down for a little while. And I finally said, Coach, I can't stand it. I got to ask you a question. He said, what is it? I said, why 3 legal pads? He stopped for a minute, and that gruff, groundly voice that Bill Battle talked about, he said, hell, I ain't never told anybody this. He said, but that first one's what I'm going to say if we get beat. The middle one's what I'm going to say if we get tied. And the other one's what I say if we're going to win. So he had prepared everything. He always talked about rehearsing. So he had rehearsed every situation that could occur. And that was one of the reasons why he was so quick to come back with the right answers. But he was an incredible man. And so, Jackie, thank you so much for joining us and sharing that story. And hopefully we'll have another round here in a little while. The next person that's a member of our huddle, I think is very special to bring him in. Walter Lewis is quite a bit younger than the rest of us are, but he has a unique situation in that he was the quarterback on Coach Bryant's last team, and played in Coach Bryant's final regular season game, or in the Liberty Bowl in 1982. Walter received first team All SEC honors, and he was nominated for the Heisman Trophy. He went on to play in the professional football in the USFL and in the Canadian Football Leagues. And then he became a running back coach at the University of Kentucky. Walter is today a very successful investment banker. So, Walter, thank you for being with us, and we look forward to hearing some of your stories that you told about Coach Bryant years after those of us played for him. So I'll turn it over to you.
Absolutely. And I want to say this is indeed an honor to be here with the group of men that are on this panel. I used to, as a player, as a freshman through my senior year, I used to just cherish the fact that a Leroy Jordan or Jackie Sherry, you were coaching at that time, but a Bill Battle, Joe Namath, and Coach Stallings was coaching also during those times as well. But you all would come back to the university to visit. And just sitting when I was on the practice field, watching you all come in and have those conversations with Coach Bryant, while we were practicing, I always wished, and I look forward to that opportunity myself to be able to come back and just talk to Coach Bryant as a person, as a human, as a person, not a player, and to be able to have those type relationships. I did not get that opportunity because when he retired, he passed away, maybe a month later from that. But just to be able to have that opportunity to watch that process work itself out, that was just an honor to see and be a part of. In terms of me being able to have, the opportunity to play for Coach Bryant, as Joe Namath said, as all the men have said on this call here, is so many stories that you can just go on. We could talk days about the stories and the experiences that we've had. But some of the things that I've learned from Coach Bryant is Coach Bryant was a coach that really focused on the small things. because he knew the small things were the trigger to the bigger things. And if you were able to get those small things right, the bigger things will come. And those things, as it relates to how it played out in the game, they were so true. It may have been a trap block to where, the steps to get that trap block by a guard or a tackle. It may have been just one little movement that was so important to be able to spring a running back for a long run. Those things rivet in my mind all the time, because the small things are things that make you successful in life as it relates to your family, to your profession in terms of what you do. A lot of people overlook those things. And that's a quality that Coach Bryant possessed. He used to take us as quarterbacks on walks. I'm sure Joe remembers these walks where he would go over situations. What are you going to do when you get behind? What are you going to do if the player opposing you calls you a name? How are you going to respond? How are you going to react? He said, in a game, always have a plan. Always. A plan if you get ahead, a plan if you get behind, a plan if you have to go into overtime, have a plan. And those are qualities that are not, personal qualities. These are things that you can build a credible life on. And those are things that I take away from him. One of the things that I saw with Coach Bryant, your background in terms of where you came from, it plays an important part in terms of how you live your life. And the background that Coach Bryant had in terms of what I've read and stories that I've heard where he came from. In my particular situation, I was the first Black quarterback there at the University of Alabama. And Coach Bryant, because of his background, because of the how he was raised and what he may have had to experience, I think he had a great picture, or was able to establish a picture in terms of how he would teach or how he would deal with my particular situation. There, he and Coach Moore at the time, they created situations that they felt like I would encounter along the way, not just as a player, but as an individual, that helped prepare me, to be successful there at Alabama at that position that I played. When I was being recruited, one of the things that my mom, Coach Bryant, actually came to my house to visit. I wasn't a big time player. I don't think, coming out of high school. I wasn't the utmost quarterback on Coach Bryant's radar. One of my family doctor actually wrote a letter to him, and I did not find out about this letter until my sister passed, to where he wrote the letter. He told Coach Bryant, he said, look, he said, this kid, I don't know how y'all feel about him. He said, but if you all signed him just to be on the team, he would be an asset to your program. I didn't know that into 2002 that letter was written, but Coach Bryant reacted to it. And he actually came to visit. And because of my situation being a little bit different, relative to what had been in the past, he sat down in my house, took us in, and like it was said earlier, he accepted you as a person. He looked at you as a person. It didn't matter the color of your skin. Coach Bryant was about winning. And whatever it took to get you in position to win, that's what his thought process was, relative to that. And he asked my dad if my dad had any questions, and I think Coach Bryant had answered all of his questions. And then he got to my mom, and my mom challenged him. And she asked him, she said, well, look, my son, we feel like he can play. And if he comes to Alabama, we don't want you to be recruiting him just to sign him, to put him on the bench, to keep somebody else from getting him. If he has the ability to play, we want him to play. And Coach Bryant's response to that back then was, if he has the ability, and if I see that he can play, I can assure you that he will play. And he did. And the reason he played is because he saw ability there that he could utilize and mold there on that team, so that I could participate and play. And the thing that I really like about how he handled my particular situation was he stood in the gap for me back then, and he gave me opportunity. And that's what any person, any man on this screen here, on this panel, he gave opportunity. And when someone has an opportunity and you got someone that's behind you, standing in the gap for you, can be there on your behalf, that's all anyone can ask for. It's not about the color of your skin. It's about, you just having an opportunity, you taking advantage of that opportunity. And that's what he gave me. And that's what you treat people like you want to be treated. And I think it was Coach Stallings that said that early on about Coach Bryant. That's what I saw. He had a unique way of really challenging each player's heart. And when you challenge a player's heart, it doesn't matter, who that player is, from where their backgrounds or where they come from. When you can get a person's heart going in the same direction, that's where you have success.
Walter, thank you very much. And you brought up something about the recruiting. And that was one of the secrets, I believe, to his success. And I think probably Coach Stallings could comment on that a little bit more maybe in the next round. But I think he was a good judge of character. And the story is told that if he heard about a player, that the first thing he did is contact somebody in the town that the player was from and ask what kind of family the player came from. Then the second thing, he'd contact the principal and find out what kind of student the player was, and was he a troublemaker or was he a good student, a good citizen. And the third thing, if they passed those first two, is he'd contact the coach and ask what kind of athlete he was. So a little bit about the recruiting thing, I think might be of interest to some of the people. I'll never forget when I met him. First time I met him was when he was recruiting me, and I'd never been to an Alabama game before that time. As a matter of fact, I had committed to go to Georgia Tech and become an architect. And he came through on a recruiting trip, and I told him that. And I said, Coach, I'm going to Georgia Tech and I'm going to be an architect. And in his manner, he got very quiet for just a moment, and he said, well, that's not a bad idea. He said, you'll get a great education and you'll win a lot of ball games. But then he reached over on his finger and he pulled off a ring, and he handed me a ring that said Southwest Conference Champions. And he said, but if you ever want to wear one of these rings that says National Champion, University of Alabama, you come there, do what I ask you to do every day, and I guarantee you'll have one before you leave. Well, that was the goal. Everything was about winning championships. And we came really close to getting that ring, Joe. You and I did at the Georgia Tech in 1962 when we lost the game 7-6. And the thing that I want to mention there too about that situation is the after the game dressing room event, because it tells a lot about the character of the man that we may not have touched upon so far right now. It was traditional for us to run off the field, regardless whether you won or lost. You didn't walk, you ran off the field, you went to the dressing room. He told us if we lost the game, we're going to go in there and we're going to shed all of our tears in the dressing room. If we won the game, we're going to do all our celebration there. But when we walk out of that door, nobody out there should know whether we won or lost the game. But we lost the game that day, and we lost the national championship that day. So he walked in the dressing room, and we all had our hands in our face, and we were teary-eyed. And on that day, rather than leading us in the Lord's Prayer, he said, take a knee. And he said a different prayer that day. He said, dear God, forgive me, for if I'd stayed at home today, these young men would have won this ball game. Now, hearing that come from him, from the coach, changed the atmosphere in that dressing room. And I think it was something that stuck with us for the rest of the season and the rest of our lives. And what he said to us that day is, you didn't get beat out there today. Time just ran out on you. And if you'll pick up where you left off in the fourth quarter and you'll practice like that next week, we'll be all right. We play Auburn next week in Birmingham. Well, we did, and we beat Auburn by 30 points. Then we were invited to go to the Orange Bowl, and we beat Oklahoma in the Orange Bowl 17-0. But he knew exactly how to lift up our spirits. And rather than blaming anybody or any set of circumstances for that loss, he took full responsibility. And by doing that, he gained the respect of the players, and I know he gained the respect of his coaches. But that's the kind of man he was. And I love to tell that story to people who really want to know what kind of individual Coach Bryant was. And that says to me an awful lot about his character. So he was a fabulous recruiter, and I was very fortunate to go with him back when alumni could go with coaches to recruit and see his ability to recruit. He was a master at doing it. So really, gentlemen, for me, I think that finishes our first round of comments. And I would like for us to do what we might call kind of a speed round, if we can, to go back around the group, and anybody that would like to comment on anything that's been said so far, or to share another story, please do so. And Coach Stallings, if you will, we'll kick it off with you again.
Well, Galen, let me say how disappointed I am that we could not work out the Zoom. Ruth Ann worked on it extremely hard and thought we had it down, but we didn't. And I would just love to see these players. I had the privilege of coaching them, and just would love to see them again. Know they're doing an outstanding job, whatever they've done, and they did an outstanding job in presenting Coach Bryant, the real Coach Bryant. They heard from him, and what a joy it was to be associated with the University of Alabama. But I played at Texas A&M, and Coach Bryant called me in his office, and he said, "Beebs, I'm going to offer you a job at Alabama. I'm going to pay you, I think, $4,000 or $4,500." And I thought I had the best job in the state of Alabama. I loved Coach Bryant. I loved working for him. I just loved him as an individual, and he meant so much to all of us. And Galen, I just really appreciate you putting this together. I'm sorry that my Zoom didn't work, but I enjoyed listening to all the comments, and I'm sure every one of us could say the same thing that everybody else said. So anyway, thank you for letting me be a part of it.
Well, you're going to get a chance to see everybody's face because we're recording this, and you'll get a copy of this recording, so you'll have an opportunity to see it. And every one of us on this call will. And also the American Heart Association has agreed to give a copy of this Zoom call to the Bryant Museum in Tuscaloosa and to the Alabama Sports Hall of Fame, so that this can be shared with a lot of people for many, many years to come. And I believe that they intend to play this frequently at some of their events, American Heart Association does, so that the coaches in the future that are nominated for the Paul W. Bryant Coach of the Year, College Coach of the Year Award will know about the man about whom this award has been named. So
yeah, because you got to realize a lot of these youngsters that are coming up now, they didn't know Coach Bryant the way that we did, and the fact that you put this together, it'll give them an idea of who Coach Bryant really is and what he stands for, and how many times we've all said the greatest coach of all times, Coach Paul Bryant. You can't ever tell by the win-loss records, but he got the most out of the player, and that's what coaching's all about.
Well, he did, and you were a great part of that, Beebs, and we want to thank you. Again, I want to say publicly what you've meant to me, what a great mentor and example that you have been, and you're just a blessing for all of us to have been affiliated with and still are. And so,
okay,
Bill,
let me say one thing you mentioned about the Paul Bryant Museum. You know, Johnny worked at the museum, and he loved his job. He would do the videos, and lots of people would come into the Paul Bryant Museum just to visit with Johnny. He just thoroughly enjoyed it. The people at Alabama couldn't have been kinder to John Mark. He was born in Tuscaloosa, and he was a joy to all of us.
he was a blessing. And all of us who had the opportunity to know him know that he fought the good fight, and he lived years beyond what all the doctors when he was born predicted. So he had.
They said he wouldn't live before 11, and he was 46 when he passed away.
Well, that shows what a wonderful parents he had, and how much love he had, and he was just a delight to be around. So, Bill Battle, I'd like for you to pick up on the second round and share some other stories with us.
All right, I know time's a problem, and I got two quick stories I want to tell. After we were working with Coach Bryant in the licensing business for a while, one day I went over there with a manila folder full of contracts. And I said, Coach, review these contracts. I'm going to come back next Thursday and pick them up, and I want you to approve them. And he said, okay. So next Wednesday, I called him. I said, I'm coming tomorrow, and I want to get those contracts. And he said, well, they're in the vault at the bank. And I thought, why in the world would he put those in the vault? Anyway, I said, well, anyway, I need to come get them. So the next day, he handed me a manila envelope, stuck it in my briefcase, took it home and opened it up. And it was all of Coach Bryant's contracts with the University of Alabama. And he started at 17.5. He didn't want to make more than the deans. But after there was a letter from Dr. Rose after the 1961 season, and it said, Dear Paul, or something to this effect, said, Dear Paul, you have returned Alabama to the highest its rightful place in the college football world. And I appreciate the fact that you offered to turn down a $5,000 raise for winning the national championship, but we're going to send it to you anyway. So it was, the numbers were kind of interesting, I thought, but it showed Coach Bryant's, he wasn't there for money. He was there to coach football and influence lives. The second one is a funny story, and it involves Coach Stallings a little bit. As I said, you didn't, unless you were football or in trouble, you didn't visit much with Coach Bryant, but I was president of the A Club, which was a on-campus fraternity back in those days. And so I met with Coach Bryant to plan the spring dance that we had. And so I was going through making sure everything that we were doing was subject to his approval. And so then he started to talk and he said, what do you want to do? And we got into the conversation about, I wanted to coach. I was impressed with what I had learned. I went from a high school that won 6 games in 4 years to Alabama, where we won, I think it was 29-2-2, our 3 varsity years, and won a national and SEC championship. So anyway, in the course of the conversation, I told him I wanted to coach, and he said, well, don't do it if you can't live without it, because it's a tough business. But I'll tell you one thing, Beav Stallings and Bobby Drake Keith are making $10,000 a year, and there are not many people in any profession making $10,000 a year. That was 1963. Evidently, so my goal in life became to make $10,000 a year, and I think this year I might get there. But anyway, so evidently Coach Claiborne must have left Alabama before Coach Stallings and Coach Keith. And so when I was interviewing for a job in 1963, my first interview was with Coach Claiborne, and he was at Virginia Tech. And so we were having a nice visit, and I was at West Point. No, this was 1966. I'd been at Oklahoma for a year and West Point for 2 years. And so we had, as young coaches would do, get around and say, well, if we got offered a job, what would we ask? We didn't have agents or think about agents, and money wasn't comfortable to talk about. So anyway, I sat down and we're having a nice interview with Coach Claiborne. And so he said, well, how much money do you want? And I stuttered around and I said, well, I'm not comfortable talking about this, but at West Point, we feel like $9,500 is what we think we're getting here at West Point. And he jumped up out of his chair and he said, $9,500? I was assistant head coach at the University of Alabama and only made $8,500. And I thought, this interview ain't going very well. So I thought Coach Stallings might get a kick out of that one.
Well, I think you eventually made what Coach Stallings made, Bill. So you've done okay, buddy. You don't have any problem talking about money anymore, do you?
Oh.
Well, Bill, thank you very much. Leroy.
Yeah. Well, I just want to add a few things. Coach Bryant was the most important coach in my life, and he was such a dramatic change for me, and so I really had a good time playing for him, and it went and carried out in my business life and my football life and everything. That his teachings were right on in every facet of my life. So I'm delighted to be here with y'all and talk about Coach Bryant and what a major influence he was on our lives.
Well, Leroy, it was important that you be on this call because, as I said, you've been synonymous with Alabama football for so long, and I just did not want to hold this call without having you on it, and we really appreciate you making the effort to join us, buddy.
Thank you so much.
Okay, Joe, you still there?
Yep, I sure am.
All right. Okay, let's hear again from you.
Well, I tell you, I just want to talk about the guys that I played with, you and Leroy and Billy, Jackie. God dang it. To start with Jackie, one of the highlights of my life was seeing you intercept that pass against Miami. Your junior year, my senior year, buddy. It saved us from losing Miami down there. We won that game, man. That was after I was suspended too, you know, and I was scared to death. I just loved you. I could have kissed you and I hugged you and all that afterwards, but I was back in Tuscaloosa. But you know, besides being a wonderful fullback, a heck of a linebacker. And Leroy, I remember after our first game against Georgia up in Birmingham, we beat them 35-0. And boy, I was happy as could be and all. And media came in, you know, and you're sitting over here, right here. I'm sitting by you, and media guys come running around there. And Coach Bryant came over there and started spreading them away, pushing them. And he said, "Get away from that popcorn kid. Go talk to the guys that did the winning." Boy, I wanted to say something, and you just hit me right, put that arm on my chest right across there. So you don't know Coach Bryant, right? Yeah, you'll learn. Stay calm, you'll learn. But I was a little upset, you know. Get away from that popcorn kid. We won 35-0. Right? It was crazy. I just want to share that because you guys I love, man, and the memories. Boy. The more we see one another and talk to one another, the more they come back. It's all because of the love we have with Coach Bryant, and we were able to stick it out. We were able to stay. We had 44 freshmen, I think, Galen in our class, and 11 of us were there at the end. But he was tough, and we learned that it was the right way to be. So thank you.
Well, it's truly an honor to be there with you and all the rest of these guys at that time. So, Jackie, let us hear from you.
You know, I've had the opportunity later in life to spend a lot of time with Coach Stallings. And, you know, every time I call him, he's on his tractor. But I always kid him. You know, I say, "Coach, you only had Coach Bryant. We had you and Coach Bryant." And, you reminded me also that we had Coach Snollenberger as well. At times it wasn't easy, and what Joe said, there was, I believe, 67 in our class, counting the walk-ons and everybody. And I think, Joe, there were 7 of us that were seniors together. So it wasn't. But my junior year, we had lost, and Joe, you know this, in Galen. We lost our 2 tight ends in 2 days. We're opening with Georgia. Coach Bryant comes in my room that night, and Coach Bryant would never go into any player's room. That he would not do that. But all of a sudden, he comes in my room, and he says, "Can you play tight end?" "Yes, sir, I can try." He said, "Hell, I know you'll try. I want to know if you can play the damn thing or not." And so, Joe, I experienced that too. But I will tell you, you played with one less receiver that day than you should have had. But going through all the things that we experienced, there's no question that the relationship, and I've always said that, I've said this to players, and I spoke today to the staff at Mississippi State, and the one thing I told them, that players that continue to stay together were the players from teams that were champions. And, you know, there's no question that this group, and Galen, thank you for allowing us to be a part of it.
Thank you, Jackie. Walter, let's hear your second story.
I sit here and listen to these stories, and I just want to say to all of you that came before me, thank you, because I had the privilege of being able to experience Coach Bryant toward the end of his career. But one story that I remember with Coach Bryant was in his last game. And that game, getting ready for that game that week, and then being able to play that night, it was 14 degrees in Memphis, Tennessee. And it was no way we were going to allow us start. We were going to lose that game. It was just no way. And it was a game to where games have peaks and valleys, but this game, it was on a steady climb all game long. And I remember running a play in the first half, and I think I threw an interception. And the second half, we have the ball, and it's like 3rd and a yard, and Coach Bryant calls timeout. And he wanted to substitute 2 guys that I did not trust in that situation. It was a situation where we had to have it. I wanted my roommate and Paul Carruth in that particular situation. And he calls timeout. I go to the sideline, and he and we actually have a knockdown drag out. It was just an argument, and it was totally out of my character. And it was just totally, it was there. It happened in that game. And he gently grabbed me in the chest. And he said, Walter, he said, I'm the leader of this team. And he pointed at me, he said, if you had been doing what you're supposed to been doing that last series, we would not be in this situation. And immediately I realized what had happened. I told you, it was total disrespect, whatever. It wasn't about him, and it wasn't personal. It was about the game. It was about winning. And they called that play that I made a mistake on the first half, because it would have worked if I had executed properly. And I went back out. It was a TV timeout for 2 or 3 minutes before I went back out there. I was apologizing to him on the sideline. And I remember throwing an interception again. And I walked off on the 30-yard line, and I was just really, really, out with myself because of what I'd done and whatnot. But I couldn't have eye contact with him for a while. So we eventually win the game. We got a key interception by Jeremiah Castile. When we get back to campus after the break for Christmas, I go by his office to apologize to him. And I sit on the couch, that couch that he has where you sit and you go down and you're kind of looking up at him. I think he had the springs pulled out, so you could sit below him. But I apologized to him, and he looked at me. He said, Walter, he said, that's just a part of the game. He said, your reaction was the reaction that I wanted to see in you as a quarterback, there. And because at that point he realized he had gotten out of me what he was wanting to get out of me as a quarterback. And one of those things, one of those traits that he wanted to see in his quarterbacks is confidence and being a leader. And I was ready to take control there. 2 days later, he passes away. 25 years later, I'm sharing this story with Major Ogilvie. And Paul Jr., it was an event that Paul Jr. had actually set up. He overheard the story from a ways off, and he walks over with tears in his eyes. And I said, Paul Jr., I said, why are you crying? And he said, Walter, he said, that story that you're telling Major right now was one of the last conversations that I had with Coach Bryant before he passed. And it really, really resonated with me because I've been here and you didn't spend a lot of time talking with Coach Bryant. I didn't spend a lot of time talking with him when I was a player, but that let me know how he felt about me to share that story with his son. there 25 years later. And it told me a lot about him in terms of what his goal was. He used the game of football, as a tool to train men to win and to train men to win. And that's something that I took away from him as my coach, my tenure with him on having an opportunity, there. So just listening to what you all are saying, I resonate with you all. I mean, the character of Coach Bryant is coming out loud and clear as relates to these stories, because it's the same story, because he was the same person in terms of how he dealt with us all. And to be associated with this group right here today is a blessing for me to be part of. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
Well, Walter, like you very kindly thanked many of us for being there before you came, we owe you and your teammates a tremendous debt of gratitude, because we knew how important it was to him to win that last game. And you guys pulled it off. You pulled it off for him, and I can tell you that it meant a lot to him, meant a lot to all of us. Those of us who are on this call, and everybody that ever coached for him, coached with him, or played for him, truly appreciate the fact that you and your teammates let him go out a winner. And with that, I want to add some closing remarks here, because we're okay with our time, but I don't want us to go on much longer.
Galen,
yes, sir.
One more thing.
Okay, Viggs.
This Gene Stallings again. When I was at Texas A&M, and we started off, we lost the first 4 games and ended up winning 6 in the championship and going to play in the Cotton Bowl. And they asked me who I wanted to play, and I said I want to play against Alabama if we can. And they said, well, Alabama's an outstanding team. Why do you want to play Alabama? I said, I want my players to be exposed to Coach Bryant. They've heard me talk about him, and now back in those days, both teams did things together, and I wanted my players at A&M to be exposed to Coach Bryant. That's the respect that I had for him.
Well, that shows what a great man that you have been and are, Gene, and I just think that's terrific. Like Bill was talking about earlier, he had a unique situation with Coach Bryant, a unique situation because of the business relationship. Later in life, I had a unique and valued relationship with him as well. I was very fortunate to become one of his personal physicians and his surgeon. And during those years, I got to know the man from a totally different perspective. We literally spent hours together talking about his health issues and his family, and what he was concerned about with the University of Alabama, what he was concerned about with America, and what he wanted to see happen into the future. And I'll never forget the day that I sat at lunch with him, and he told me that he had made the decision that it was time for him to retire from coaching. And I challenged him on that. I said, Coach, I've been hearing that you're going to retire from coaching since I was a junior at Alabama. And I said, it's just really not your nature. He said, Galen, it's different now. He said, he said, I'm not in good health. He said, we're losing players every year now because players are hearing about my health, and other coaches are using it against me. And he said, it's time for me to get out. I've got to get out. He said, I've stayed too long. And very much like in that Georgia Tech dressing room, he took full credit. And he said, I should have retired a long time ago. And then he said, Alabama's going to be in for some bad years. And he said, I've seen it happen at other schools where coaches stayed a long time. And he said, it's going to be tough because y'all going to have to hire somebody that's young enough and tough enough to weather the storm. Because he said, our alumni, our fans, our former players, everybody's going to be divided. And it's going to take a while for us all to come back together again. And it was amazing to see him talk about hanging it up, as he said. He would bow up a little bit and he'd say, but if I did this and this and that, I bet I could win one more national championship. And then he'd get talking along those lines, and then he'd stop and tears would come down his cheeks. And you cannot imagine how difficult it was to sit there and watch a man that was bigger than life have tears rolling down his cheek and crying, because he said, Galen, if I do, I'll die. And he said, I don't want to die. Coach Bryant had had a really serious heart condition for the past 2 years. He was in atrial fibrillation. He was in severe angina. He said, I bet I'd take 20 aspirins a day just to be able to get through the day and make it at practice. And he said, I've stayed on because I heard from so many of my former coaches and players that they wanted me to go ahead and win the 315 and win, break that record. And he said, I've really done it for them. And he said, I've got to get out now. I can't do it anymore. And so on the day that he won the game that took him over the top, I went into the dressing room to check on him, and I went back into the coach's area, and he was sitting there slumped over in a chair. He was pale, he was diaphoretic, and he was probably having angina at that point. And I kneeled down and said, Coach, you okay? He said, Galen, I don't know. I think I'm going to be okay. And about that time, Clem Driscoll walked in the door and said, Coach, President Reagan's on the phone for you. And I saw him start to gather himself, and he went from a slumped over man that didn't look like that he could stand up. He stood up straight, and he walked through that dressing room and went to the phone, and he talked to President Reagan and laughed and carried on, and President Reagan congratulated him on the win. And he came back and sat in that same chair and slumped again. And he had the ability to, what he used to tell us, suck up your guts, go when you don't think you can. And he had the ability to do that. But you know, the day finally came when he died of a heart attack. And that's one of the reasons that the American Heart Association has named its award after him, because he suffered from heart disease. And on the day of his funeral, those of you who were there know full well that the downtown area of Tuscaloosa was completely filled. The church was running over. It is estimated that 200,000 people lined the interstate between Tuscaloosa and Birmingham. And there were almost that many people at the graveyard there at John's Rideouts, where he was buried. And on that day, the University of Alabama, the state of Alabama, and a game of football buried the body of a legend. But his memory continues on in the minds of those who knew him personally and the people whom we were able to share these memories and life lessons. And I think I join my fellow members of the Alabama football family in saying to the American Heart Association that you're commended for keeping the legend of Coach Bryant, the myth of Coach Bryant, alive for the ages. And on behalf of the Alabama football family, this afternoon, we thank you. And so with that, Jenny, I'll turn it back over to you and the staff. And you guys have really been exceptional in trying to get us all together. And it has been a true pleasure for us to be with you guys and to do this today. So thank you very much. And we'll let you do some closing remarks.
Well, Galen, thank you. That was a touching story. And really, we thank you and your fellow Alabama legends for bringing us this incredible event. I mean, this is just surreal to hear all of these stories. And you've done such a beautiful job, all of you, with making us feel like we could be on the field with all of you and Coach Bryant. It's really, really special. So we thank you.
Absolutely amazing. Thank you all. Thank you very much. And if you'd like to support the life-saving work of the American Heart Association and the Bear Bryant campaign, you can text 71777 to Bryant Awards now. Text 71777 to Bryant Awards right now. And as you think about a potential gift, we hope you enjoy Coach Bryant's famous poem, A New Day, as it's read by Coach Bryant and some of the players that joined us today.
This is the beginning of a new day.
This is the beginning of a new day.
God has given me this day to use as I will.
I can waste it.
I can waste it.
I can waste it or use it for good.
What I do today is important.
What I do today is important.
As I am exchanging a day of my life for it.
When tomorrow comes,
this day will be gone. Forever.
This day will be gone forever.
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 Leaving something in its place.
I have traded for it.
I
want it to be gain, not loss.
Good.
Good.
Good, not evil.
Success.
Success, not failure.
In order that I shall not forget.
In order that I shall not forget the price
I paid for it.